So we're going to look at a landscape design approach for ecosystem services, and then we're going to use some case studies to look at how we can implement those on a project basis. So we're going to look at defining the ecosystem services with a project in Belize, and then looking at how you can look at ecosystem services assessment, looking at the NDR road scheme, and then looking at ecosystems valuation using the River Medway and Parmoor as examples. I'm not going to get too hung up on what ecosystem services are. This is one of the wheels that have been developed by the Millennium Ecosystem Services Group in 2005, and it's looking at all the services that the environment provides for human beings, so supporting services, provisioning, cultural and regulating. Now, without trying to take the previous presenter's slides about Tony Juniper's quote, I quite like the idea from Monty Python is, what has the landscape ever done for us? So, what services does the landscape provide for us? We've got, this is an example of a hay meadow in Transylvania. We're looking at provisioning services, so there is hay that comes off the crop, it slows down stormwater runoff. We've got pollinating resources, and also, it's a very beautiful place. We've got scenic quality there. So ecosystem services gives us an option of being able to look at including the externalities that are not normally accounted for in the decision-making process. It gives us the opportunity to look at valuing the multiple benefits that we can achieve in the schemes that we're implementing. And as landscape practitioners, we're ideally placed to be able to pull together the different disciplines, look across those disciplines, and try and tease out those multiple benefits. So let's start in Belize. So this is a project that we were involved in for DFID. It's an international funded project. It's a road improvement scheme transporting bananas from the plantations to the port. So you're probably quite well aware in your kitchen, bruised bananas are not very good for export. So you need a nice flat road to be able to get them through. So we were interestingly brought in to look at reviewing an existing EIA that had been done. So that gave us the opportunity to look across the topics. So one of the issues that we have within the EIA process, and some of the speakers have already talked about this earlier today, is you tend to be a little bit siloed. We look at the landscape impacts if you're doing the LVIA within your topic. And yes, you do look at the interrelation between other topics, but you can't really look at the trade-offs and the benefits between those topics. So the ecosystem services gives us a framework to potentially achieve those benefits. So we were looking at the EIA. Having done that review, the materials winning for the scheme was actually one of the real big issues. So we started to have a look at that and said, okay, there aren't sufficient resources of quality material to be able to build the road in the location that it's in. So what's the first option within Belize? River gravels. Easy to win, they could be licensed, and they're within easy reach of the road scheme. There's a big problem with winning river gravels. You might lose the mangrove swamps directly. You may increase sedimentation. There's a very close relationship between the quality of the mangrove system and the coral reef on the coast. If you get rid of the mangrove swamps, then you can increase pollution to the coral reef, you can increase sedimentation. The coral could then die, then becomes weaker, and you then open up the coast to more erosion and loss of coastal habitat as well. So not a great idea. So we could look at quarry sites. This is an existing quarry in Belize, quarrying quality limestone. We've got these upstone limestone outcrops within a very flat pampas landscape. But this one's too far away from the scheme. So what we actually had is something a little more like this without the botanist in the photo. But it's a pristine forest. We've got bats, we've got high endemic species. It's a strong area of cultural heritage feature. It's Mayan civilizations. So what can we do to actually protect this landscape? Is it a suitable site to actually win materials? So this is what the landscape actually looks like. You can see the limestone outcrop standing very proud way above the plain. There's a lot of subsistence agriculture in the area, uncontrolled forest fires to grow rotational crops of milpa or maize. But in terms of looking at this for a quarry site, we've then got a problem of, okay, if we put another road in here to access a quarry site, do we then open up these areas of pristine forest to more exploitation? But we could look at it as more of a provisioning service for the local community. If this is cacao or products of your chocolate bars, it likes a closed forest canopy cover. We could look at additional benefits that the local community could get from maintaining that forest cover, and they also get economic benefits from actually achieving that as well. So it's a win-win situation, but we were only able to look at these issues by looking at it in the broader context of all the disciplines that were involved in the scheme. Coming back to the UK, this is the NDR. It's a DCO project that was delivered in
started construction
18 months ago. Okay. And we undertook an ecosystem services assessment that supported the environmental statement as part of the DCO process. So this is the scheme. It's 20 kilometres long. It extends from the A47 to the River Wensum Valley, which is a special area of conservation and high quality ecological landscape. So in collaboration with Cranfield University, we used an INVEST model to quantify, map and value the ecosystem services, both before the scheme and then with the scheme, to see what the outcome was in terms of what services and changes that we would implement as part of the scheme. And I said that supported the EIA. The National Character Area Profile for Central North Norfolk, Area 78, has defined a range of ecosystem services that can help drive the direction of travel for your particular projects you're taking that forward. So we've got provisioning systems, it's high quality arable farmland, there's abstraction for public water, soils are noted as being at high risk of erosion, and they're actually nutrient poor. So although it's a very productive landscape, it's actually supported very heavily by inputs of fertilisers. And there are also cultural services as well. Tranquility, recreation is very important in this particular area. So how does that change the way that we've done the design? Looking at the water elements, we had a very supportive and strong landscape lead within the council, who was enabled us to be a little bit more visionary in terms of what we were doing in terms of road scheme. So normally you get a quarry site, I would call it a quarry site, which deals with the water runoff from a road scheme. They're fenced, they're very steep, there's no public access, and they're a danger to actually maintain if you've ever had to do your CDM regs on it. So we took larger amounts of land. We have very shallow slopes. There is no fencing. They're no more than a metre deep. And we've been able to incorporate a lot of wildflower planting as part of recreating the headland characteristics within an arable landscape. This follows a three process area of filtering the water as it comes off the road. So we've got the grass verging the swales into a lined attenuation pond into an infiltration basin. So we're looking at recharging the water to the aquifer. There is no discharge directly into the River Wensum. It's a totally closed system. And as I said, we have benefits for wildlife and landscape. We've incorporated 25 kilometres of bridleways and cycle tracks as part of segregated routes to encourage a modal shift as part of the scheme. We've involved local communities where they've done woodland bulb planting and incorporated some of the redundant buildings and agricultural assets. And we've looked at recreating wildlife, species-rich grassland, as I said, to replicate the existing features of that landscape in terms of the headlands in an arable landscape. In terms of the INVEST model and the ecosystem services assessment, Jackie's just going to map out what we found and how we took that forward.
Okay, so the first thing I suppose we ought to say is why undertake an ecosystem services assessment in the first place? When we were already undertaking environmental impact assessment, well, the truth was I'd attended the DEFRA Tables project and got rather excited about it. So managed to persuade the client to give us £15,000 to do it as a pilot, which Cranfield matched by another £30,000 worth of input from them. So in the end, we got a very robust study. I guess I was quite interested. The landscape architect who'd originally been the environmental coordinator had a very holistic approach, which I continued. So, for example, when we talked about the shallow lagoons and things, it seemed natural to account for the shallow lagoons as drainage, flood protection, biodiversity, habitat creation, amenity, because they're only a metre deep. They have amenity value. We weren't restricting access to them. And so what were we actually taking away? Well, we were taking away agricultural land with no amenity value. And it was quite interesting because we had a discussion with Department for Transport, who said that we'd valued the landscape wrongly, in that they'd valued it as amenity historic parkland, or historic parkland with amenity, but in fact it was historic parkland, but it was under intensive agriculture, and there was no access anywhere, as the DFT people had to stand on top of the Land Rover to see it because they weren't allowed entry. So, so we saw an opportunity, I think, and the reason we used INVEST is because it's a very large-scale project. And INVEST, I don't know if any of you attended the previous seminar here on GIS and BIM, but it's a GIS-based system. You can combine it with InfraWorks, which is really interesting. So you can do an ecosystem services model, you can combine it with InfraWorks and see what it looks like, and then you can put whatever valuations you want into it. And that's why we used it. There are lots of other models. I know that other consultancies, including ourselves, have got our own models. I'm not married to any particular model. I'll use whatever's most appropriate for the project. For a big project, a GIS model seems the best. This is a very, very sort of cursory look at what we did. As ecosystem services assessment is about changes in land use, we looked at the existing land use. We looked at what the land use cover would be with the NDR, and we measured that against things like carbon stocks, habitat quality, sedimentation, and we decided at that point is where the creativity comes in. So you see what you've got, you see what you're going to put in, rather than just try and minimise or eliminate impacts. Why not be a bit more creative and say, well, what do we actually want out of this? You know, we want this land open to public access. We want there to be good flood risk and attenuation of water. We want it to improve water quality generally. Norfolk has very poor water stocks, you know, resources available. It's one of the driest areas in the country. So the whole scheme is SUDS-based. I don't know if the lady here from this morning is here, but yes, it's entirely SUDS-based, the drainage system. Again, incorporated into landscaping and habitat creation. We mapped the existing land use cover using available data sets that we had, and we had a lot of data. We'd been studying this site for nearly 8 years before we actually went for the planning application. Sorry. And then what are the changes as a result? For another scheme, we were doing the Medway and Swale Estuary Strategic Environmental Assessment, managed realignment, maintaining sea walls. The Environment Agency wanted us to incorporate an ecosystem services-based approach, qualitative, not quantitative in this particular one, and we are currently undertaking that, and it's proving to be quite interesting in that in some ways ecosystem services assessment gives you a counterintuitive answer, and then when you analyse it, it suddenly makes sense. So you'll see a designated site, you think we're going to manage realign that with perhaps making it deteriorating the quality. You do an ecosystem services assessment, suddenly it's a little different viewpoint. We also, I'll quickly zip through these. We did some ecosystem services on a number of Environment Agency schemes in Cornwall. As you can see, there was 3 packages. One was a very basic package. These were just flood risk packages, flood alleviation schemes. And 2 had slightly more enhanced landscaping, and 3 had a considerably more enhanced landscaping. And as you can see, the benefits accrued on those schemes, and we can break those down for you a bit. So, the flood risk schemes generally aren't open to tourism, and they don't have a huge amount of recreation. However, if you look at how we've increased, and they were quite small changes to landscaping, increased the benefits considerably in terms of their ecosystem services. Now, this monetary valuation is important because, as people were talking this morning, partnership funding now has a line which says what are the ecosystem services benefits in your funding application. And so you can actually now put a line in there, which means it makes a difference between maybe not getting funding to do managed realignment or even raising walls and getting it. So it's I think the monetary valuation is really very, very important. And in addition to that, you can develop trade-offs. So, for example, with the NDR, we knew we were going to have adverse impacts on agricultural production. But agricultural production, when you looked at it, was mostly sugar beet and rapeseed. So we decided, would it be better to have amenity, biodiversity, against the trade-off to agriculture? Now, it's not very popular with the local farmers, but it's very popular with the local people. And that's what we presented. We went through examination in public. We were never challenged on it, any of it. It seemed to make sense to people. So I do think it's a very, very important tool.